Once upon a time in the bustling city of Lagos, amidst the cacophony of honking cars and the aroma of street food, stood the prestigious University of Lagos. It was a beacon of academic excellence, drawing students from all corners of Nigeria. Within its walls, Mrs. Johnson, a strikingly beautiful and intelligent woman, taught literature with a passion that was infectious. Her presence was magnetic. Every time she walked into a room, heads turned, and whispers followed. Mrs. Johnson, whose first name was Amora, was not only known for her beauty but also for her keen intellect and compassionate nature. She was married to Mr. Johnson, a wealthy merchant who had built a fortune in trade and commerce. Their marriage was the talk of the town, not just because of their wealth but also due to the deep respect and affection they held for each other. Amora Johnson, in her early 30s, had an aura of grace and sophistication. Her long, flowing dresses and the way she carried herself exuded elegance. Her lectures were always full, not just with students eager to learn, but also with those captivated by her presence. Among her many admirers was a young man named William. William was a student of literature, known more for his athletic prowess than his academic achievements. A star of the university's football team, he was a popular figure on campus. With a physique sculpted by rigorous training, he had a confident charm that made him the subject of many conversations. Despite his average grades, his determination and charisma made him a favorite among his peers and professors alike. William lived with his grandmother in a modest home on the outskirts of Lagos. His parents had mysteriously vanished when he was a child, leaving him under the care of his loving grandmother. Despite the hardships, his grandmother had ensured that he had a decent upbringing, instilling in him values of hard work and resilience. He also had a girlfriend, Amelia, one of the popular girls on campus. Amelia was the epitome of modern beauty, with her fashion-forward style and vibrant personality. Their relationship was the envy of many, as they seemed the perfect couple, him, the athletic heartthrob, and her, the charming beauty. However, beneath the surface of his seemingly perfect life, William harbored a fascination for Mrs. Johnson. It started innocently enough. He admired her intellect and beauty, often finding himself captivated by her lectures. His admiration soon morphed into something more, as he began to notice the way she smiled, the subtle elegance of her movements, and the melodic cadence of her voice. In class, he would often flirt with Mrs. Johnson, his comments veiled in humor but laced with a genuine admiration. "Mrs. Johnson, you make even Shakespeare sound exciting," he would say, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Amelia noticed this and confronted him multiple times. "William, why do you keep flirting with her? It's disrespectful," she would say, her eyes narrowing in concern. William would brush it off with a laugh. "I'm just trying to be on good terms with the teacher, Amelia. You know my grades need all the help they can get." Though Amelia remained skeptical, she chose to trust him, convinced that his charm was simply part of his personality. As the semester progressed, Mrs. Johnson found herself increasingly drawn to William. Despite maintaining her professionalism, she couldn't deny the spark of attraction that his youthful energy and charm ignited in her. He reminded her of a younger version of herself, full of dreams, ambitions, and an unquenchable thirst for life. One late afternoon, after a particularly engaging lecture, William stayed back to ask Mrs. Johnson a question about the assignment. The classroom was empty, the golden rays of the setting sun streaming through the windows, casting a warm glow on the polished wooden desks. "Mrs. Johnson," William began, his tone more serious than usual, "I'm struggling with the thematic analysis for this week's assignment. Could you help me understand it better?" Mrs. Johnson looked up from her desk, surprised by the earnestness in his voice. "Of course, William. Let's go over it together." She walked around the desk, standing beside him as they pored over his notes. As they discussed the intricacies of the text, their proximity made her acutely aware of his presence. She could feel the heat emanating from his body, the faint scent of his cologne mingling with the scent of old books. Her heart raced as she caught herself stealing glances at him, admiring the sharp lines of his jaw and the intensity of his eyes. For William, being this close to Mrs. Johnson was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. He could sense a change in her demeanor, a softness that wasn't there before. Encouraged by this, he took a bold step. "Mrs. Johnson, have you ever felt like you were meant for something more than what life offers?" His voice was low, almost a whisper. She paused, taken aback by the depth of his question. "Yes, William. I believe we all have moments where we yearn for something beyond our grasp." Her eyes met his, and for a fleeting moment, the world outside ceased to exist. Their conversation flowed seamlessly, moving from literature to life, dreams, and aspirations. By the time they realized the hour, the sun had set, leaving the classroom bed in the soft glow of the streetlights outside. "Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. This means a lot to me," William said, his voice sincere. "Call me Amora, William. Outside the classroom, we can dispense with formalities." She smiled, and he felt a rush of warmth spread through him. From that day on, their interactions took on a new dimension. What started as innocent flirtation blossomed into a deeper, more meaningful connection. They would find excuses to meet, whether it was discussing assignments or simply sharing a quiet moment in the library. Each encounter was charged with an undercurrent of unspoken feelings, a tension that neither could ignore. Amelia, though unaware of the depth of William's connection with Mrs. Johnson, sensed a change in him. He seemed more distracted, his thoughts often wandering. She confronted him again, her patience wearing thin. "William, something's changed. You're not the same. Is there someone else?" He looked at her, guilt gnawing at his conscience. "No, Amelia. There's no one else. There's a lot on my mind with football and studies." Amelia wanted to believe him, but the nagging doubt persisted. She loved William deeply, and the thought of losing him was unbearable. Meanwhile, Amora found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. Her professional boundaries were blurring, and the lines between right and wrong seemed to fade. She loved her husband dearly, but the excitement and passion that William brought into her life were intoxicating. She was torn between her duty and her desires, struggling to reconcile the two. One evening, after a particularly intense football match, William found himself wandering the campus, his thoughts a tangled mess. He ended up at the faculty quarters, standing outside Mrs. Johnson's apartment. The cool night air did little to calm his racing heart as he knocked on the door. Amora opened it, surprise flickering in her eyes. "William, what are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't stop thinking about you, Amora. This connection, it's real. I know you feel it too." She stood there, her mind reeling. The rational part of her screamed to send him away, but her heart ached for him. She stepped aside, allowing him in. The door closed behind them with a soft click, sealing the fate of their forbidden attraction. As they sat together in the dimly lit living room, the air heavy with unspoken words, Amora reached out and took his hand. "William, this is dangerous. We both know that." "I don't care," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "I need you, Amora. You make me feel alive." In that moment, all the barriers between them crumbled. They leaned into each other, their lips meeting in a kiss that was both tender and desperate. It was a kiss that spoke of longing, of forbidden desires, and of a future that was as uncertain as it was intoxicating. As the night wore on, they talked and shared their fears, dreams, and regrets. It was a night that marked the beginning of something deeper, something that would change their lives forever. Little did they know, the consequences of their actions would soon unravel, leading them down a path fraught with challenges and heartache. And so, The first chapter of their story closed, leaving them standing on the precipice of a love that was as beautiful as it was dangerous. As the dawn approached, casting a pale light on the horizon, Amora and William knew that their lives were forever intertwined, for better or for worse. Leave a comment below for part 2.